Hey everybody, check out this 1967 Vespa Super 150. Someone just had freshly painted and asked me if I could put it back together for them. Wait, did you guys see that? What's up everybody, welcome to the channel. Today we're working on this 1967 Vespa Super 150. As you can see, the owner had it completely taken apart and all repainted. In this build series we will put it all back together. He also got pretty much everything new, all the trim, wiring, and on top of that, what I'm really excited about is this retrospective scooters electric conversion kit for a large frame Vespa. It features a 4 kilowatt hub motor, and also in this box the 72 volt 36 amp hour battery, and together it gives you about 40 miles of range and at speeds of over 60 miles an hour apparently. So yeah, if you guys are ready, let's get to it. All right, so let's start by assembling this front fork assembly. First thing we're going to do is install the bearings. The way I do it is I find a socket that's about the size of the bearing and I press them in with a press. You can probably also do it with a hammer by gently tapping it in, but I do it with a press. So let's do that first. Alright, so got the bearings plate pressed in. Big one on this side, little one on this side. So on this side, you got to be careful when you're pressing the bearing and not to nick the threads. This is actually for the cap that goes over that covers the axle nut. So that's that. So on this side, there's actually a snap ring that holds the bearing in place. Looks like this. So I like to cover the bearings in grease first. Alright, now for the snap ring. That. Just a little tap, make sure it's in the groove. There's a little oil seal that goes over it, the entire thing, like that. So usually you can push it in with your hands, but I have the tool for it, so I'm going to use that after putting a little grease around the edge here. Alright, there you go. So for the axle, there's a little washer that goes right here on the end. Usually when you remove it, this gets left inside the hub assembly, so make sure you get that out, because if it gets left in there and you go and press the bearing back, the axle back in, you may actually be hitting that and messing that all up. So don't ask me how I know that, but yeah, there's that. So push the axle in just like this. Again, you probably have to press this side in. And when you do that, you want to have something. So the way I do it is I put it on this side and I press the entire bearing over the axle, because if you do it this way, you actually push the bearing out of the seat there. So let me do that. Alright, so I've got the axle pressed back in all the way through. The bearing is still in the seat. Okay, after that, we'll put some grease in there, which I've already started doing. Pack the bearing a little bit. Yeah, a lot. There you go. Alright, good enough. So the nut has a little, I guess a little standoff. You look at it, and this part goes in towards the bearing. And proper you torque this down, you gotta have it all back together on the bike with a tire on. Because if you want to keep tightening this, the other side will keep moving. Like that. So I'm just gonna finger tighten it for now. Enough. That's it. And when you go to actually assemble it, there's a little spacer that goes in first, and then the cap. Where did I put it? Oh, right here. There's the cap. See how it's threaded? Goes in like that. So this one was missing a spacer. The spacer looks like this. That goes in first. By the way, all these parts that I'm getting that are new are actually from Scooter Mercado, if you guys are wondering. So I'm just going to lightly put that on for now. Just like that. It'll have to come back off for me to torque it properly, but just to show you guys how it goes. That's that. Okay, next up is going to be the speedo gear. This one's a little mangled up, but it looks like this. And it goes into this little brass fitting with a little grease fitting over it. Like so. So sort of like this. Okay. Alright. So when you go to put it in, you're gonna have to spin the axle for it to, go in correctly, so you don't chew up the gear like somebody has already done. So I'm just showing you for now. I'm actually going to replace this gear once the new one comes in. So put it back in, spin the axle while you're doing it. Yep, so it seats in properly. After that, you have a little grease fitting. Make sure that's actually pointing downward when you do this, otherwise you can't put grease into it. That goes on first, and this goes in after it. And then you tighten it down like this. Again, I'm only showing you guys, but once I get the new one, I'm going to get it apart again. Alright, so if you actually look in there, how it works is when you spin the axle, you actually see that spinning, and that in turn spins the speedometer cable. Well, that one's a little mangled up right now. It's probably hard to see, but see how it's spinning when I spin the axle? That's how the speedometer works. Alright. Okay, next up. Alright, so spring pivot assembly. Comes as a kit. So this is the spring pivot itself, the rod it rides on. There's 2 washers and 2 O-rings, and then also a locking tab with a bolt and a little circlip for the brake shoes, which we'll get to later. I have never successfully got it all together. with the O-rings without tearing them up, so I just leave them out. I mean, I've never had an issue with it. I just keep the assembly greased up, this little nipple there, and yeah, like I said, never had any problems with it. But you know, if you're feeling adventurous, you can try. So this O-ring is supposed to go in there. Washer, repeat on the other side. O-ring, washer, and then this entire assembly sandwiched will go right there. So when you're doing it, make sure the nipple is pointing downward, as you see here, because if it points the other way, you're going to get in the way of the speedo cable. So it's supposed to go in there together like this, and then the pin goes in with a notch facing down all the way through the entire thing into the spring pivot and out the other side. But like I said, I've never successfully got it through without destroying both or one of those O-rings, so I just leave them out. It's tight enough to where grease doesn't keep coming out of it. So yeah, put those aside. Just gonna go washer, washer, the grease nipple pointing downward into this little cavity here. Pin with the notch facing down through the entire thing. Get all lined up. There you go, through the whole thing. So it should look something like this. So later on, when you actually lock this pin in place, use this tab here and then bolt through the middle here. But you don't do that yet until the actual pivot, fork pivot pin is in. Alright, now we go to the fork pivot pin. The customer actually had this thing blasted and painted, so he disassembled everything to do so. Usually there's more parts to this, but he didn't have any of them, so I ordered a kit, and this is what comes with the kit. 2 bearings, a fork pivot pin, and 4 washers. So usually it's a little different, but this is what we have to work with, so we have to do it with this. First thing I'm going to do is press these bearings into this fork. There's one on this side and one on the other side. And after that, this entire front fork assembly will go sort of like this. Like this. Okay, so we'll get to that once I get these bearings in. Alright, so we got the bearings pressed in the fork. One here, one there. Alright, when you do that, make sure the letters are facing outward when you press them in, because this side's actually closed, the other side's open. So when you go and fill grease into it through this nipple, grease can actually get up through the bearings on both sides. If you put them the other way, it kind of seals them off, so grease can't get up in there. Alright, so next up is putting the actual fork assembly onto the fork. As I mentioned, this is not how it comes from the factory, but this is what came with the kit, so that's what we're going to have to use. So I did find this locking, or this tab washer with an index on it, in the pile of parts the customer provided me, so I'm going to reuse that. And then we're going to put 2 washers here and 2 washers up here, and then we will slide this whole assembly over the fork as so. So let me do that off camera. It might take me a minute. So I actually flip the fork around so it's easy to see. So I got the assembly on the fork. Got 2 washers up here and 2 washers down here to take up the space. After that, you take the pin, as so. There's a little cutout notch on the top. Make sure that's up while I put it down into the assembly. Let's see if I can get this. That's one set of washers through. And there's the other set. Okay. So once that's done, to lock it in place, this little locking tab that I talked about earlier goes in between here and here, like that. Okay. Then with a little bolt down the middle, once you tighten that, it'll flatten out this locking tab and it'll hold the 2 pins in place. Alright. Alright, so I went ahead and tightened this 10mm bolt down. And when I did that, it flattened out this locking tab, which in turn locked these 2 pins in. I did use a little bit of Loctite there. I think it's absolutely necessary, but you know, a little Loctite never hurts. So next up is the spring, which is this side. So this bottom spring mount comes loose, but I went ahead and tightened it, which is what you're supposed to do. That's a 14mm nut. So after that, you take the spring. The spring is actually beveled, so you have the top, or the wider part on the top, smaller part on the bottom. So when you go to put it on, you kind of just spin it on this bottom mount here. Like that. It's usually good enough to where it won't move. And on the top is the top spring mount. This you leave loose. 2 pieces. Make sure the threads are pointing upward. Slip that in there, turn it like that. And then this is the top cap. It goes like kind of like that. Okay. Now you kind of have to force it into that hole there and then put the lock washer nut on. So let's see if I can get that without killing myself. All right. Yep. This kind of sucks. All right, let's do this again. All right, so the vise method failed. My vise is just not heavy duty enough. So I remember last time I did this, I did it on the ground. So let's do that the same way. So the top mount, one with the stem goes on first. Kind of just spinning it to about so. The top goes on about there. After that, you kind of need to force it. Come on, baby. See if I can get it in there a little more. Come on. There you go. There you go. Like so. Put that up top. Lock washer first and then the nut. Kind of push this down while you tighten it. Make sure it's in the right spot. Yeah, it's about right. about right. Okay, that's that. I'm going to tighten the nut. We should be good as far as that. So it's actually the next day here, and yesterday we got the spring on, the front fork assembly onto the fork and all assembled. Today we're going to put this nice BGM adjustable shock absorber on the front here. Pretty simple. It's just 2 bolts, one here and one here. On the front one there's notches in the fork assembly, and then there's teeth on the actual shock absorber. So I just had to line that up, put a bolt through, and a nut on the other side. The front one here is going to be a bolt, and you can actually see it's threaded here, so you don't need a nut. So let me get that on. Alright, so I got the shock absorber installed. It's a little bit tricky. I kind of had to compress the spring a little bit to get the shock in between this part and this part. But other than that, it's pretty easy. Just a bolt down here, goes straight through. Lock washer and nut. This is actually not the right nut, but this is the only thing I have, so we're going to use it. It looks like it'll work pretty good. On this side, it's just a bolt that goes straight down this way with the lock washer, and it's already threaded here. Well, yeah, threaded here, so you don't need a nut on that side. So yeah, that's that. Next up is going to be the brake pads, a little dust shield, and also the hub assembly. Alright, let's get to that. Okay, so the Super 150 comes with a 8-inch hub for 8-inch wheels. The customer actually did some 8-inch and 10-inch conversion wheels, but yeah, we're not going to use that. We're going to do it the right way and go with the actual 10-inch hub. Alright, when you do that, you actually need to add this little dust shield onto the fork assembly. Otherwise, without it, it's wide open back there, and who knows what can get in there and mess the brake pads up. So first off, we're going to put this on to the fork assembly, and then the brakes, and then the hub. Okay, if you didn't notice, it's actually the next day, and it's hot in here, so I had to tear the sleeves off. So you have to excuse me. Anyways, the fork assembly is all assembled. Like I said, we're going with a 10-inch hub. When you do that, you have to add this little dust shield to cover up the extra space. So this is actually different from what a factory one looks like. The factory one is actually a lip on the inside, just like on the outside. So you can kind of just tap onto the lip and kind of hold itself in place. But they said that you can actually peen the corners of the hub here to hold it in place, but I tried doing that, and all I was doing is chipping the fork assembly, so I'd rather not crack this thing. So we're gonna just put some JB Weld in 3 of these corners, and that should be fine. Alright, let's do that. Alright, so I got my JB Weld mixed up. For those of you that don't know what that is, a 2-part epoxy. It comes with 2 different tubes. You kind of just squeeze a little bit on a piece of cardboard and mix it together, and that activates it. So like I said, I'm going to use that to actually hold this dust shield in place. So I'm just going to put some here. Should be good. Right there. And some over here. I'm only doing this because a dust shield. It's not that important, but I don't use JB Weld on anything else. Alright, 3 corners. Looks pretty good. So we'll just let that harden up, and then after that, we'll put the brake pads on. Alright, now that the JB Weld's hardened up nicely, That should hold the little dust shield in place. Next up is actually putting the brake shoes onto the fork assembly. So first off, it's going to be this brake shoe cam pin, I guess is what it's called. That goes in here like this. You see I already put some lube on it. You gotta make sure that's nice and free. This is actually what spreads the pads apart to stop the hub. That's good. Brake shoes. I like to kind of assemble everything off of the fork assembly first. Kind of put the spring on, the two little holes there, and also the two little metal, I guess, shims or whatever you want to call that. And then I kind of put it over the fork assembly like this, and I just work it around the brake cam. Let's see, like that. Some people like to use pliers to work the spring on, but totally not necessary. A lot easier that way. As I mentioned before, this kit came with a circlip, and that's what's going to hold the pads in place on this pin. Usually it comes with a clip that looks like the Omega sign, but this one came with a nice circlip, so we're going to use that. Alright, so spread that over. Oops. Just like that. Brake shoes or pads are on. So it's actually the next day again, and I got the pads on last night. So let's finish up the other side. So the way this works is the arm that goes over the little brake cam, and once the cable pulls it, it spreads the pads out on the other side. So let's get that on there. It's tight fit, so I have to tap it on with a socket over the pin like that. Once you get that on, get a cotter pin, do like that. Bend the cotter pin out. There you go. Like so. After that, you have the cable clamp. Comes like this. The pin, this goes over the arm, and a pin comes out. It goes through the whole thing, as so. After that, another cotter pin. Just like that. So now this is all assembled and the cable's attached. When the cable pulls this arm, you'll see the brake pads spread out, and that's what stops the wheel or the hub. All right. Okay, now that we got the brake pads on, everything assembled, let's go ahead and put the hub on. So on the axle itself, there is a cutout for a woodruff key. Woodruff key is a little piece of metal that's shaped like a half moon. So this goes into the cutout as so. Okay, and on the hub, there's also a notch for that woodruff key. So make sure that's lined up when you go and put the hub on. Try to do this as best I can in this angle. Oh, there you go. So like that. All lined up. After that, axle nut. Now I'm going to put this all on the bike with a tire on before I actually torque that properly. But once that's torqued, it's very important that you put a cotter pin in here, because if that nut backs out while you're riding the bike, you're going to have a very bad day. So very important, cotter pin on this nut once it's all torqued down. Alright, so here's the fender. I'm going to put some tape over it just to minimize the chances of chipping the paint. We got the fender crest on there. That was pretty easy to install. Kind of just place it on there. On the bottom you see two pins coming out and some retaining clips. I did have to hammer these clips over the pins, But after you do that, it should be nice and tight, ready to go. Now be sure to put something underneath it when you go and hammer onto the fender, just so you don't scratch it. But yeah, there you have it, fender crest installed. Okay, now that the entire front fork is all assembled, and the fender crest is on the fender, we're going to go ahead and slip this over the fork. The hardware you're going to need, or what I use, this might not be original, but I use these flange bolts, also a flange nut with a little teeth on the bottom, so they actually lock in place instead of a whole bunch of lock washers and whatnot. Same thing as on the side of the fender. These are actually special. Look at a domed flathead. I believe the thread is a M5 by 0.8, and these little special nuts have a little lock washer built into them. So let's start by getting the fender over the fork. There's a certain way of doing this so you don't destroy this thing. So if I remember correctly, kind of go like this over the first steering stop and then over the second, just like that. After that, one bolt in the front here. Come on. One in the back. Nuts on the bottom. Okay, this is the top bolts. Now for the side of the fender, I showed you before, it's these two special domed flathead M5 by 0.8. So one there, one there. I'm going to do a washer and a nut on the other side. When you go to tighten these, don't tighten them from the outside, tighten them from the inside with the socket, just so you minimize the chances of destroying the paint on the outside. All right, and also don't tighten it too much, because you don't know how much Bondo can be on these fenders. It may crack if you tighten too much. So just snug them down, and that's it. Same the two top M6 nuts. Grab a socket or a wrench. There you have it. A fully assembled front end, pretty much. Next up, we'll put the wheel on. Okay, now that the fender is over the fork, we can put the wheel on. Again, make sure you put down some towels or something so you don't scratch the fender while you're doing this. But this is pretty simple. Kind of just spin it along. Put the wheel on just like that. Hardware. Lock washers and the nuts. So again, I'm just going to finger tighten these, and I will torque everything properly when it's on the actual bike. All right, there you have it, ladies and gentlemen. A fully assembled Vespa Super 150 front end with a 10-inch wheel hub conversion. In the next video, we're going to be actually installing this thing into the frame. So, with all that being said and done, if you like what you've seen so far, please like and subscribe. I will catch you all in the next one. Thanks for watching.